This is a rather odd ritual, I would say. Do we ever really think about the handshake? We take our right hand, we extend it out, we grab the right hand of a person we may or may not know and shake it up and down. And what are we trying to communicate through this? Are we acknowledging someone's presence? Are we extending friendship, camaraderie, establishing a sense of trust, goodwill, all of the above? It's just something that we don't even think about because it's just part of our culture. Well, it turns out that the handshake is something that dates all the way back to Greek and Roman days. There are pictures, depictions on artifacts that show soldiers coming off the battlefield, removing their gloves, showing nothing up my sleeve, no shenanigans here, extending the hand as a way, as a kind of a precursor to establishing some trust before they enter a truce. The handshake is just one of many different kinds of ritual protocols which are used by societies across cultures to try to establish a sense of connection to another person. The word protocol literally means first bond. And there are so many different ways cultures set out to create this first bond. In many Eastern countries, there is a bow, sometimes a low bow, which is to communicate a sense of respect and humility. In Europe, there are different forms of the greeting. Sometimes it's a peck on the cheek, sometimes it's a peck on each cheek. I've even seen three, a peck, a peck, a peck. But it's a way to establish a connection with a little more intimacy, an extension of love. Common among our youth is the fist bump or the thumbs up. That's a way to establish a connection with not too much physical contact. And of course, here at HCRJ, we extend our arms in big embraces to make sure everyone feels like they're part of this greater family. These physical displays of trust, courtesy, dignity, and friendship have long been and continue to be ways that human beings greet each other and establish momentary connections. These protocols, however, are not merely first bonds. They are extensions of our civility. Unfortunately, in today's ever more polarized world, there seems to be a decline in civility. We have become angrier, uglier, and more vulgar as the norms which dictate decent human behavior seem to be eroding before our very eyes. We no longer engage each other with a sense of trust. We often jump quickly to conclusions about other people based on what they wear, where they live, how much ink they have on their arms, how many holes and piercings they have in their bodies. We judge people by the color of their skin, what they believe, how they vote, who they love. We make assumptions based on very limited and very superficial information. And sadly, we rarely listen to each other anymore. And when we do, it so often is in the form of trying to find holes in their arguments, not to respectfully hear what they have to say. Today, the nuanced art of dialogue all too often slides into knee-jerk defensiveness and hostile argumentation. Rather than seeking common ground and compromise, we view the opposing ideas or opinions or values as something of an adversary that needs to be crushed and defeated. In the marketplace of ideas, our engagements with each other have become a fragile, hypersensitized battlefield as a lack of civility has permeated our country, our government, and our interactions with each other, especially in social media. We literally walk on eggshells around each other, as it is absolutely impossible to bring up any topic of concern in our world or in our nation today without having to brace ourselves for some kind of emotional reactivity jarring back at us. Trying to share ideas is so difficult. Healthcare, public education, guns, taxes, national security, these are real issues. Real important issues to discuss and to debate and to dialogue about. But these topics, when we engage each other, quickly erode into vulgar, disrespectful diatribes on both sides. In truth, the democratic process is a messy endeavor. It is difficult, especially in a nation like ours, which is so evenly split between two very different approaches to governance. But 100% agreement is not something that has ever been what we have tried to achieve. Our country has survived and thrived in part because we have embraced the notion that from earnest debate and rigorous engagement with those whose ideas and viewpoints may be different from our own, comes a wealth of ideas and solutions and compromises which can hopefully serve the greatest number of people. At the heart of this endeavor, at the heart of the democratic process, is civil engagement. Civility is the bridge to a place of common grounding to be established. With simple protocols like a handshake, we extend ourselves with humility and respect and demonstrate that we are willing and able to engage with open minds and open hearts. Just a few weeks ago, our nation lost a statesman whose ability to extend his hand across aisles of disagreement exemplifies the value and importance of civility at the highest levels of our national identity. Senator John McCain, through his many years of service to our country, demonstrated the art of civil engagement. While he may have been known as a maverick who held very, very strong opinions on everything, Senator McCain was always willing and ready to extend his hand across party lines in order to establish possibilities for bridges of compromise and generate pathways toward consensus. In his final words to our world, which he expressed in a beautiful letter, John McCain emphasized the value and importance of civil engagement. Here are a few of his thoughts. My fellow Americans, we weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all corners of the globe. We weaken our greatness when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down, when we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change they have always been. We are 325 million opinionated, vociferous individuals. We argue and compete and sometimes even vilify each other in our raucous public debates. But we have always had so much more in common with each other than disagreement. Indeed, even with his famously short temper with those who crossed him, civility and the belief that we are all created equally in the eyes of God came to shape the essence of Senator John McCain's legacy and service to our nation. Through his life and actions, he helped us understand the value of listening to our adversaries, the importance of continuing the conversation, and the centrality of mutual respect when engaging in political debate. Senator McCain helped us comprehend that simple protocols, like a handshake, are instruments in establishing early foundations for trust in our relationships. Most importantly, he reminded us that while we may not agree on everything, there are some fundamental aspects of our lives that we value, and those values are shared by all people, and they represent starting points for our interactions with each other. Civil discourse demands that we maintain the capacity to see aspects of ourselves reflected in those with whom we disagree. Civil discourse demands that we recognize that we have more in common than we often believe. Civil discourse demands that we find ways of embracing those commonalities before we engage in our interactions. In civil discourse, the gloves off, nothing up my sleeve extension of the hand can go a long way in establishing a positive starting point for our interactions with those who may be on the other side of arguments we have. Yet all too often, we make outrageous assumptions about our rivals and about what motivates them and what they are trying to accomplish. In moments of conflict, we often jump to conclusions that those with whom we have issue are motivated by emotions that are opposite from our own. Take, for example, a simple family squabble. More often than not, in the heat of an argument, we make assumptions about the intentions of our children, our spouses, our siblings, our parents, that are totally off base. We assume that they're trying to manipulate us, or maybe that they're trying to divert us with some emotional argument, or whatever it may be. But these ill-guided assumptions about what the motivations of those we are arguing with can poison our abilities to resolve the issues at hand. In psychology, there is a fancy term for these kinds of assumptions. It is called motive attribution asymmetry. Simply put, motive attribution asymmetry is when we assume that the actions of those with whom we don't agree are coming from a place of ill will. And when that happens, the symmetry of our interactions become compromised. A highly oversimplified example of this kind of psychological asymmetry is embodied in something that we experience all the time when we drive in Houston traffic. We're driving along the feeder road that parallels the freeway when suddenly we are almost hit by a car that zooms right in front of us. And when we look to our side, we see that there is a teenage girl on the phone chatting away, and we think to ourselves, how reckless, how irresponsible. This is so terrible, and our hearts are racing, and we are so worked up. And we pull up to the stoplight at the street, and there she is, still chatting away. And we look through the window and give a stare that just shooting angry needles. Nothing, because she doesn't even know what happened. The light turns green, we're still worked up, we drive through the light, and suddenly our cell phone rings. And we look down, it's your daughter. You pick up the phone and you answer because your daughter might need you. And there is the asymmetry. The asymmetry of the scenario is that you have made the assumption that that teen driver has things that don't apply to you. While that teen driver is being irresponsible and reckless, you have made the same decision to pick up the phone and talk on the phone while you're driving, but for you, it's a good reason. Your daughter might need you. We do this all the time. There are countless scenarios where we engage in the exact same behaviors as those with whom we have issue. But for us, it's okay. Because for us, we have a good reason for what we are doing. In truth, we rarely know what the reason for other people's actions may be. But we are very frequently quick to make an assumption that what is true for ourselves is not true for them. This asymmetrical assumption often leads, in our disputes, to very unnecessary escalations in tension and hostilities on both sides of the conflicts we face. When we believe that those on the other side of an argument are motivated by ill will, malice, ignorance, or something other than what motivates our behaviors, there is often very little room for negotiation. However, if we can somehow nurture within our abilities to see and understand that most human beings are driven by the exact same impulses, and if we can humbly recognize that the motives of others may be indeed mirroring our own, then we can begin to expand the capacity to work together. There is a famous parable about the ongoing disputes between the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. These are two rabbinic academies that existed around the first century, and they argued about every single detail of Jewish law. The disputes between Hillel and Shammai are very well documented in the Talmud, and they are central to much of what we practice as Jews today. Now, according to the Talmud, God always, ultimately, sides with the house of Hillel. Why? It is because the house of Hillel, unlike the house of Shammai, always cited the rulings of both sides of every dispute. Hillel's rulings always gave credence to Shammai's view, demonstrating humility and legitimizing the value of the perspective of others. In our world today, we desperately need to act a lot more like the house of Hillel. Instead of digging in our heels, insisting that we are right, dismissing contrary ideas as wrong and misguided, we need to open our minds to alternative ways of seeing and understanding. We need to remember that there is always more than one side to any given story, and that there is always more than one way to address an issue. Instead of listening for holes in arguments, we need to listen more attentively to the narratives of others with more curiosity and with more interest. We need to seek common ground with those we do not agree with, and we need to find ways of continuing the conversation with reason and respect. On this Day of Atonement, as we seek to find a sense of resolve and at one-ment with the world around us, let us pledge here together today in this sanctuary to strive to be more civil in our discourse. Let us pledge to honor each other by listening more fully, by dismissing less readily, and by trusting that all of us seek justice and peace and mercy in this world, even though our approaches may be different. And may the first gestures of this commitment and promises that we're making right here today be as simple as a handshake. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.